Well, I would have to say thank you guys all for being here and registering for this class. I'm hoping that everyone could take some piece of information from this particular course and actually apply it in your personal life or actually back in your department, in your role, because that's really what Lean's all about. So today I'm going to talk about what is Lean, okay? How can you use it, and how can you apply it in your job? Okay, so that's really the purpose of this session. So I'm going to be talking about some very kind of like an overview of Lean, kind of talk about some of the history related to Lean. So let me just go into the slides. And I can skip this because you guys don't need to know about that. But I'm going to talk about a lot of different things. But let's start off first with the complexity of UC Davis. As we all know, UC Davis is very complex. It's a large enterprise that we have a lot of different operational activities going on. It's like a small city. It really is, and with the complexity and all the different departments. In my previous experience here at UC Davis, I was in organizational excellence and had the opportunity to go into a lot of different departments and see exactly how you guys are operating, your processes, the systems that you're using, et cetera. So I saw the complexity in just this organization alone. Now, with that complexity, it comes a lot of challenges. It comes challenges as far as not standardization on processes, decentralization of activities, of how things happen. It also different philosophies of management and how people relate, microcultures, all those things that make challenges for an organization such as this size as UC Davis. So what the purpose of this presentation is about is how Lean can actually apply to UC Davis to help within the collective, but then also in the micro, okay? So as you read on the description for the class, we talked about what is Lean. So we're going to spend more time explaining what is Lean because Lean is a very hard methodology to explain because it means a lot of different things. But in the context of this class of where we're going to actually stick with that definition is around eliminating waste out of a process and creating more value for your customer. Okay? Now, customer may be a term that people at the university may not understand or completely reconcile, but customers would be your faculty members, they would be your students that you're serving, it could be staff internally within your department, or other functions within the campus. So an example would be like the Shared Services Center with Sarah Reed and her team. They're servicing multiple administrative functions across the campus. And I'm sure many of you as well, if you're sitting in an academic cluster or any other cluster servicing out your different units or departments, it's very similar to your customers. So primarily, as I said before, we want to make sure that we apply the Lean methodology in your personal life because Lean is not just for professional working and work activities. It's a philosophy of life we'll talk about, but it's also about looking at processes and figuring out where is the waste. And we'll explain what waste is and how you identify it and how you work through systematically of removing it out of your processes. Because I think that is the key component of Lean. It's an actionable methodology that you can use every day. Okay, so we'll cover what is Lean, how to identify value. That value is a very key word here. How to create a value stream. A value stream is, we'll explain it more, but it's really about the process, the step-by-step activities that happen within a process and identifying where they fall, each process step, into a particular bucket, and we'll talk about that. How to create flow. Lean is about flow. And many people, if you practice meditation or you practice yoga or you practice any Tai Chi, they talk about flow. Lean is also about flow within process. It's how things actually come together and actually flow from one thing to the next, from one person to the next, from one step to the next. It's really about how you create that flow. The next one is pull. How do you create pull? Pull is how you pull things from one step to another or from one person to another. If it be a handoff, it be a process step, a transformation of data in a system, however that's configured, that's what pull is. And then also the last fundamental principle around Lean is perfection. So Lean is always looking for some form of perfection within the operational processes that you have. Your value stream, your products that you're providing out to your customer, your faculty member, student, or staff member. So primarily, how do you create that continuous improvement that will sustain your Lean journey and also sustain some of the improvements that you've made? You keep those and you keep adding incrementally on. And then the last thing, I want to give you guys an action plan. So as you walk out of this session, you know exactly what you can do step by step to actually apply this into your life, okay, or into your job. So that's what today is going to be about. So what is lean? So lean at the foundation is built in under quality. By show of hands, how many people understand what quality is? What is quality? Does anyone know what quality is? I'll pick on someone. Terry Sagai. What is quality?
Quality is something of value.
Okay.
Something that has a value to you, a worth.
Okay. It means something.
Yes.
It has something that means something, it means something to you as a person, right? So quality in the sense of lean is everyone's responsibility. Everyone's responsible for quality. So it puts it on not only just on the supervisor or the manager or the executive leader or the chancellor or the provost. It puts quality in the hands of every individual that's in the organization. Now, quality is focused on the customer, what the customer needs. So the customer needs can be the faculty member, the staff member, or even the student. So what are their expectations on the service or the transactional activity or whatever you're doing? What is their expectation on that process? So foundationally, lean is focused on quality. And quality also has organizational quality as well. So it's looking at the organization as a whole. Because many of our processes don't happen in silos, they happen interdepartment. So they're going from one department to the next. And many of those processes you guys experience every single day. Like when you purchase something here at the university, that goes through multiple departments. And that's organizational end-to-end quality. When you actually hire someone, you're going through multiple departments. When you're processing a grant, you're going through multiple departments to process that one transaction. So primarily, it's about creating quality, not only within your unit, within your department, but also throughout the whole organization. But that results in a few different things, which we'll talk about in a second. So lean. So when you think about lean, we talked about quality, but also lean is a philosophy. So lean was birthed, and we'll talk about the history of lean, but lean was birthed out of production, manufacturing within Toyota, and we'll talk about that in just 1 second. But primarily in the Japanese culture, they actually incorporated a lot of their philosophy and also ways of thought and religion into their methodology of lean, okay? So lean focuses on perfection, flow, and value creation. Those are the three things that are built into that framework or thought process. It's how we create perfection within a certain domain, how we create flow, and also how we create value for the customer. The other core thing is realizing what is the customer value. So many people say, okay, my processing time is 3 days. I'll get something done for you in 3 days. That's my cycle time. But the customer may have a certain expectation that the cycle time is 24 hours or the cycle time is 1 day. So it's about mirroring up what the expectation of the customer is to your process. The next one, understanding the customer needs and wants. Customer needs and wants drive the value for the customer. So that's one aspect of lean, is that everything that you do, all tools or techniques that you use within lean is based on that foundation of what the customer needs and wants are, and how you mirror your transactional activity or your services back to that need or want. Simply, lean means creating value for the customer with fewer resources. As we all know here at the university, we are operating with few resources. A lot of people I have seen it, a lot of people are operating in multiple positions and being able to still manage, but then also you're managing with a lot less. And that's what lean's really all about, is how do we manage a process with less, but focusing on value creation, what's really important, versus the things that aren't really important. So let's get into a little bit of a history. And I won't go through all of these points, but I'll talk about where lean was birthed and how it came about within our current marketplace and within the industry now. So are you guys familiar with boating? Boating at all? You guys, any boating people that like history around boating? Okay. So back in the 1500s, there was a flow production of how you create boats. And it happened in Italy, of where they were creating boats and how they actually manufactured the aspects of the boat and how it moved throughout the water. So the first thing they did as far as manufacturing and creating something, creating a product, started in the 1500s of boating, actually how they created boats. Now, systematically, it moved into like, how can I create multiple boats and more boats to actually meet the customer need? There were more people that wanted boats, so we had to make them quicker. So we had to figure out how can we make interchangeable parts, because certain people may have certain likes. They may say, I want this boat to look this way. I want this boat to be bigger or have these dimensions or have this color. So the invention of interchangeable parts happened in the 1700s, the concept of it, that we want to actually change the parts of how boats are being made. Now, then primarily, after interchangeable parts, the idea was initiated in the 1780s. In the 1860s, the high volume of interchangeable parts happened, where we could actually produce more because we had more interchangeable parts that we can make the actual end product. So it focused on how can we make more, but then also have more interchangeable parts to make that more. Okay, so that built the foundation of flow in a production. Okay. Now, it kind of moved quickly in that process, and then it was the first introduction of the moving disassembly line. So this is where it was produced actually for meat packers. Meat packers had to move meat throughout the factory and determine how they can actually move it most effectively and swipe out the excess waste. So when they were cutting the actual meat and get it prepared for market, they had to figure out a way to actually remove that excess waste and then move the meat along the line to actually get it produced to go out to market. So that was the other part around disassembling and moving in flow within production. The next thing I'll highlight here is when we had the truly interchangeable parts was with Ford. Ford created the assembly line, and then he also created the ability to mass produce and deliver on a large quantity of interchangeable parts and flow within the assembly line. So they could produce a lot of those Model Ts. As you guys know, in the early 1900s, that was the big boom. The car boom was here in the US. There were a lot of mass production of cars. The Model T was the car everyone wanted. And Ford allowed it to actually happen. They were meeting that demand. Okay, so after that, the fabrication of the parts. So fabrication means that I wanted something different inside of my car. I want my seat to look a certain way, or I want my seat to have a certain color, or interior stuff within the car, I want it to be different. So the fabrication of those parts were introduced by the Ford manufacturing plant as well. Now, the difference is that after World War II, Japan was a part of World War II, as everyone knows, and we kind of demolished them in a way that they had a hard time getting back up to speed as far as production and getting their civilization back to where it was. So there was a concept of mass production that came from Henry Ford and then also from Toyota. So Toyota started this concept of just-in-time. How many people have heard of just-in-time? Okay, there's a few people that heard just-in-time. The concept of just-in-time is having the right parts at the right time to actually produce that whatever product you're creating and get it out at the right time based on the customer demand. So just-in-time was introduced in Japan by a US researcher that actually Deming went over to Japan to actually help them to create their production systems. Because they knew that they had to establish another economy, they had to create some type of demand of goods, and their goods was coming in the form of cars at the time. So after that, there was the introduction of talk time. Talk time is another concept within Lean that's very important. It's about yield. It's about meeting how do you create flow and yield so that you have the proper level of resources at a certain time, and that flows throughout the production. And then at the end, you're still meeting the customer demand, but then you're also incorporating just-in-time type of philosophy. So I'm pulling parts and I'm having the right level of inventory at the right time to create and assemble this car and then actually pass that car over to a customer or whatever in that particular case. So talk time is about yield and how you create flow within a process. And then from there, the training came because the US started to notice that Toyota was actually producing a lot of cars in a small quantity and actually having diversity in their cars. So it wasn't just the Model T, because people have preferences, they have different opinions, they have different wants and desires. So everyone wanted a different car, and Toyota actually was producing those in multiple different varieties. So at that point, they had to figure out how can they pass information throughout the factory. So they use this concept called Kanban in supermarkets. Kanbans in supermarkets are passing information to actually flow products throughout a factory or a process to make sure that the information is flowing appropriately. So if from the product going from point A to point B to point C, that Kanban is passing information throughout the process to make sure that the next person that gets it knows exactly what the issues are, what they need to do, and what's the next steps. And then the Kanban is passed to the next thing. The supermarket is making sure they have the right inventory at each point, at point A, point B, and point C. Okay, so that's the concept of Kanban. And then also inventory is entered on the Kanban. So if they need to refill the supermarket, the Kanban tells the person at the next point that we need to refill, and that goes to the next person we need to refill, and they have replenishment within that supermarket. So the person that's at point A, point B, and point C, they can still continue doing the assembling. So there's no real lack of time going from the assembly point and moving to the actual inventory to pull back and put raw materials back into the supermarket. So it's the concept of that came. The next point was lean management. So lean management came around. There's not just assembly and processes that happen, but there's also a way of thinking around how we manage processes and how we create continuous improvement. So lean management also came out of Toyota. So after that, mass production management had to occur. So mass production management is where, okay, now we have just in time, now we have interchangeable parts, now we have the Kanban and talk time actually incorporated. Now we need to figure out how we incorporate that concept into mass production. So the other key thing that happened was the US decided that they wanted to take these types of ideas and apply that to creating arms, creating firearms. So they created the concept of mass production and firearms, interchangeable parts, to be able to mass produce firearms, okay? And then that concept birthed the next step, what Toyota provided. So lean was introduced after they got the research from the US government to actually help them to produce their cars quicker. So lean was introduced in 1987, the concept of lean. It was actually introduced by MIT. MIT spent 15 years actually researching globally all car manufacturers across the world, and they looked at every aspect of their operations. And the one thing that came out of that 15 years of research is that they saw that Toyota created this production system that was very effective in times of turmoil, in times of less resources, in times of a lot of variability, and how they could manage it. So they produced this one seminal book, it's the birth of lean. It's called The Machine That Changed the World. And this book, it actually defines the whole process of how Toyota came up with lean and how they benchmarked Toyota against every other car manufacturer within the US and then also within Europe. And this book is very good. It's a great read if you're interested in reading it. But then out of that book in the 1990s, once the book came out, a lot of companies wanted to understand how Toyota was doing it. Toyota was creating so much market share and their profit was going up, it was just sky high. So they wanted to understand it. So the next seminal book that came out was Lean Thinking. So Lean Thinking not only talked about the manufacturing aspects of lean within Toyota. They also talked about the philosophy and management style of how you incorporate lean within an organization. And here we are. We actually have lean being one of the methodologies a lot of organizations are implementing. And lean, as of 2007, made Toyota one of the best in class manufacturers in the world. So the principles of lean. So let's talk about that. It's 5 steps within the principles of lean. The first step is making sure you understand what the customer needs are. They call it product family. So in this case, for you guys, it would be purchasing would be one, hiring would be another one, processing a grant, setting up the accounts for the grant. Or it could be I'm processing students. Like I want to process an application for a student. That could be a product family. Or it could be, I need to do some academic success with the student. I need to meet with the student and I need to figure out where they are and advise them, academic advising. That could be a product for the customer of a student. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the first thing you want to do is understand where the customer sits and what types of services or products do they want. The second thing is you want to identify all the steps that happen in the process. And what we call that in lean is called value stream. So the value stream are step by step, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. How those actually operate in sequence, okay? So understanding that and then after you understand the process steps, how do you work about eliminating some of the things that are not useful or not creating value? So they call it waste, okay? The terminology of waste. The next one, make the value creating steps occur in tight sequence. So that means that if there are non-value added activities happening in the process, you want to work to eliminate those and create the value activities and put them closer together. And then you want to work on some of the other aspects that we'll talk about in a second. Releasing or eliminating some of the handoffs that are unnecessary or eliminating certain activities that are not necessary, okay? The next thing, after you tightly link those process steps, you actually want to think about how do you create pull. And we'll talk about pull. But pull is you want to think about what are the downstream steps and how do the downstream steps say that I'm ready for the next transaction or ready for the next activity. How do you create pull within a process? So if you have process A, B, C, D, you want to have process D pulling on process C and C pulling on process B. So you're creating a pull in the service within that value stream to make sure that everything's flowing appropriately. And then the next one is that as you have value actually specified, your value streams are identified, then you want to remove the waste, create the pull and the flow as you introduce those things into your process. And then once you do that, you want to start doing a continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is through this concept called Kaizen. How many people have heard of Kaizen? Okay, Kaizen is one of those terms that a lot of people hear because it's very effective, but it's a way of creating continuous improvement, and we'll talk about that more. So to sum it up, when you think about lean, the principles are identifying the value. That's the first step. The second step is mapping the value stream. The third step is creating flow. Fourth is establish the pull that we talked about. And then the next step is seek perfection. So once you seek the perfection, it's through via Kaizen. It could be A3 thinking. It could be 5 S's. I will talk about all this stuff, what it means in a second. As you create that perfection, you figure out what's the other additional value you're looking for. How can I identify that value? How can I value stream that? How can I create pull? How I can create flow? And you continuously go on this cycle, and that's how you create your continuous improvement, is through that cycle. So, the concept of waste. There are 3 different areas of waste. The first one that we'll focus on, because the other 2 are more complex and we don't have the time to go through those, but I'm going to introduce the main one. It's called muda. Muda is Japanese for waste, okay? But there are 3 categories of waste. One is muda, the second one is mura, and the third one is muri. Mura is for variability. It's variability in a process. How can you cut out variability? I know many of you guys have heard the term standardization, 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 to the point where you're like tired of hearing standardization, standardization. But however, standardization has some benefits to it. but it also has to apply to the right process. So you have to think about what process you're applying it to, but standardization has some benefits. The third one is Murray, overburden. How overburdened are the resources in your process, or how overburdened is the process with how many transactions are trying to flow through? So it's actually affecting your yield. So you're not getting enough out of the process, or you're having errors or defects, they call them, within your process. And you want to understand what is the Murray within your process. So we're going to focus in this class just on MUDA. Okay, MUDA is the first level of waste, and that waste we'll get into in just one second. So the two big objectives of lean, and we all know that we're trying at UC Davis to become the 21st century university. That's what the chancellor has said many times. Now with that, that means that our administrative and our academic processes have to be excellent. And with that being said, we also want to have some return on investment. So lean is not only about creating value for the customer and also creating some form of optimized process, eliminating waste, but it also focuses on financial return. Because when you remove that waste, you can reallocate resources to something more value added, and then whatever you have left is what you get back in your return. And then also you can apply other principles in lean, which I'm not going to get into in this particular class, but there's other ways of how you can create savings and return on your investment for lean. Okay. The second point is cultural transformation. Cultural transformation in lean, it gets people thinking a different way. So when you're let's just say you're a processor and you're actually processing payroll and you do that every day, that's your job. Now, when you're in that processing payroll, you're thinking about it different. You're like, oh, well, hold on, we probably could organize this a little bit better. You know, why am I walking from here and over here to get forms, or walking over here to sit with an employee to actually put them into PPS or to process their PAN or whatever the process would be? Why am I doing that? Because clearly if I just reoriented myself and reoriented the experience with the employee or the student or whoever I'm hiring, I will allow myself to cut down on all these additional steps, and that can be more efficient because I can have it all set up. Another example is that, okay, I'll use a shared service center. We process multiple student hires. I mean, there's like hundreds of students that come in and they get processed like at cycles within the year. So with that being said, it's like, how do I create the environment where the student gets there, they have a reasonable amount of time to actually get processed, to sit down with their payroll coordinator, fill out their I-9 document, fill out all their the oath document, all the understanding around TRS, all those specifics, and then be able to get out of there within a reasonable amount of time. But with that, you have to design how that process flows for a person. So you have to think about point by point, what's the value added, what's the value creation within that process, that value stream. So that would be a value stream. How would that work for the student? And primarily is thinking how that payroll coordinator could be sitting within that student hire session and saying, hold on, you know, I see some lean could be happening here. And I can see how I can bring that forth to my supervisor or to my manager. And how about we come together and create a Kaizen and let's fix how this process actually happens. So it empowers the employee to do that. So it achieves the strategy of the organization by the 21st century organization, but also thrives on change and growth. So it's allowing people to think that everything that's happening now, I have some control to actually help or influence it to be better. So it creates that foundation there. And then also the last point, it manages by fact. So the fact component is really where we're looking at value streams. So value streams has data related to it. So there's some type of systematic way that we're going to do on a continual basis, looking at how we're performing. And based on that performance, we can make adjustments and see exactly where we need to make those changes. Okay, so I'm going to answer this question because I'm sure a lot of people have this question within the room. There's a lot of quality methodologies. Another one of them is called Six Sigma. So I'm sure, by show of hands, how many people have heard of Six Sigma? Okay. All right, Six Sigma is another quality methodology. Now, Six Sigma is focused on some of the similar things that Lean is focused on. So Six Sigma talks about customer quality, organizational quality, and results. Very similar to Lean. But the only slight difference that you have within Six Sigma and Lean is that Six Sigma focuses on timeliness, accuracy, and cost primarily, and it's about defects and quality. So that's the foundational activity on Six Sigma, okay? But it also talks about meeting customer expectations, driving out waste and costs, very similar to lean. Okay, the results that they're looking for is improving processes that are critical to business results, and then also making things measurable. So making metrics and defining those metrics and measuring those metrics, and that's primarily what it's doing. Now, what typically happens is most organizations can combine Six Sigma and Lean together, and they call it Lean Six Sigma. Okay? So typically, Six Sigma is focused on quality, which is primarily the foundation of it. That's all they focus on is really quality, because everything that they do is equated back to a metric. Six Sigma stands for statistical distribution of processes and how many defects you have per million. Okay, so but primarily that's what Six Sigma is focusing on. So it's really about how do I drive out defects out of my process versus thinking about how do I create flow, how do I create pull, how do I create the right process steps. So when you think about lean, lean is about speed, but also about process. So Six Sigma doesn't necessarily focus on everything about process because they have the DMAIC aspect of Six Sigma that's define, measure, analyze, control, improve and control. So with that, they're doing more measuring, more analyzing. And then when they create the control or the improvement, they use lean. So lean is really a process philosophy. It's around process, pull, and flow, primarily. So you can focus on a couple of things under lean. So lean is cycle time reduction, process analysis, elimination of waste, rapid project execution, and error proofing. Error proofing is another really big thing. They call it poka-yoke inside of lean. And it's a big concept about how do we create an environment where a person in a process will never make an error because we prevent the errors. And that can happen via system or it can happen via visual workspace. They call it visual workspace. And they've used it and they have a lot of evidence-based research in manufacturing and healthcare. Healthcare is one of the biggest areas right now where where people are getting medical errors. They're getting infections from the hospital. They're getting, they're put in the wrong, they're getting the specimens are labeled wrong and the testing is labeled wrong. So they've created these visual workspaces where error proofing is very effective. Okay, so let's talk about the state of higher education. So one of the things about higher education is that we have a large population of employees. It's one of the largest employers within the states in many different cases. But you have a lot of revenue pressures. You have resources are stretched to the limit. You have efficiency and operations are one things that people are desiring. There's heightened risk and compliance. So the state of education is kind of very a mirror to lean if you think about it that way. So UC Davis. So we have a large enterprise here at UC Davis. We're incorporated within the UC system. Within that being said, we have budget cuts from the state and also internally within our organization. But we have resource limitations, process complexities and challenges. So a lot of those things happen. We have decentralization and centralized operating structure and diversity in how we get things done. So the emergence of lean is happening within universities. So about maybe 5-6 months ago, I did a very brief kind of like business case for the HR department here at UC Davis of how we can utilize lean in different ways, Lean Six Sigma. So I did a survey, or I kind of reached out to several other universities to see where they were if they were incorporating Lean or Six Sigma. And these are some of the universities that are actually using Lean and Six Sigma right now within their university. And they're applying it not only to administrative processes, but some of them are applying it to their clinical processes and also to their academic processes. One being example that kind of hits home for us is that our Med Center is actually using Lean. They have a group that's called Performance Excellence that they are using Lean within the clinical and also administrative processes. So as you can see, there's other universities up here that kind of match our environment. Like for instance, the University of Washington is one that they're actually using Lean at their medical center and also at their campus. And then we have another one here, University of Wisconsin-Madison, that are using a combination of Lean Six Sigma. So there is a value proposition for Lean here at UC Davis. So it's a template for problem solving because it provides you, which we're going to get into that very shortly. It gives you a way to actually problem solve. They call it A3. So A3 is what's the problem, how we get to the root of that problem, how are we going to work to solve it, and what's the action plan and accountability of actually solving that problem. So it gets to a very clear way. And A3 is one page. You put it on one piece of paper, it's 11 by 17, and you define how you're going to work on that one problem. So it's a real clear way to get everybody on board of what we're doing and how we're going to how we plan to actually achieve it. The second point I've kind of reiterated a couple of times about promoting total involvement from everyone. So everyone's actually involved in the process. So there's no one that's eliminated out of the process. It could be anyone. It could be administrative staff. It could be the AVC. It could be the provost. It can be anyone that's involved inside of the lean process. The other thing, it makes processes visible. Many cases, from my experience, and it could be limited because I was only here for 2 years, but when I was I did a lot of process mapping when I was here. And the one thing I noticed when I was process mapping, when I asked questions, a lot of people didn't know the full process. They didn't know from end to end how things work. And I identified that when I was doing a lot of the process mapping. And I felt that once I started to make it visible, people saw, wow, this is a long process and it's pretty complicated. It's pretty complex. And through that, making it visible, people realize that there's things in the process that can be improved, and we can identify which areas need to be improved. And when you make a process visible, that's when you know how you can improve it. If it's not visible, how can you improve it? Okay? The next one is obtaining voice of the customer. So the voice of the customer can be internal or external. So you want to kind of get a sense of like where people are, how satisfied are they with your service, your transaction. That's very critical to understand because that should be driving the things that you're focusing on, the priorities that you have within your process improvement. And then the last one is identifying and reducing hidden costs. There's hidden costs in a lot of different areas. And I would say even at the university, there's hidden costs in many different areas that we could possibly be saving and helping the university move and reallocate those funds for other things, for more additional resources. But hidden costs is another factor within Six Sigma.